The rolling switchblade is a relatively advanced footwork trick. Surprisingly, you don't need to know how to do the regular switchblade, the one where you jam the nose down and end up in a tail stop. But you do need to make sure that you're comfortable with regular shove-its, walk the dogs, and monster walks. If you can't already do those three fluidly and smoothly without hesitation, this isn't going to work. Although getting the right board setup isn't essential for this trick, there are a couple of things that are going to make it a bit easier for you in the long run. First of all, the flatter the kicktails are, the easier this gets. Steep kicktails will make this feel very heavy, it'll get in the way of your foot as you move it round. Something a little bit mellower is going to help in a big way. But the most important thing is getting the wheelbase right. Too short, this is going to feel cramped and awkward. Too long, you're going to struggle to get the second part of the trick because you're going to be stretching too far. Getting the right wheelbase for your natural stance is crucial on a lot of tricks, and that's never been more relevant than here. Your ideal position for a rolling switchblade should be something like this. Front foot at a 45-degree angle, bridging across the truck bolts and into the nose, the back foot comfortably nestled in the curve of the kicktail. With this trick, as a general rule, the more perpendicular that front foot is, the better it's going to look, because you end up with much crazier body forms and shapes, but that becomes very difficult. If you point the front foot straight forward, the motion is a lot easier, but the form just doesn't look as good. It's not as interesting. Splitting the difference with that 45-degree foot position, it really gets that nice middle ground. It still looks interesting, but you don't get quite so tangled up. So this is what you want to aim for. That being said, there are points I catch myself doing it where in the process of setting up for this, my front foot is straighter than I would like. It happens. Don't get too hung up on it. As long as you don't settle for this, as long as that's not what you're working with and you're aiming for that, you can let yourself off. Getting into the motion of the trick is where knowing how to switchblade actually probably is not just not useful, but it's probably actually harmful to you at this point, because the core idea is the same. We're basically doing a shove it from this point, but instead of jumping, we want to more or less take our weight off it. We don't want to jump and lose contact with the board. We want the board to spin cleanly beneath that front foot. But with the switchblade, you've conditioned yourself to let the board go out ahead of you and then slam that front foot down to stop it. If you want to keep rolling, this isn't going to help. So the switchblade becomes a bit of a false friend, and we need to look at ways of getting out of that habit and keeping the board moving. That's not the easiest thing to do. The solution to this effectively is just to lean forward a little bit. Now, that may seem counterproductive at first, but when you think about what's actually happening, that makes sense. You don't want to jump forwards like a shove it, but also you don't want to lean back because then you push the board out in front of you. Hey, it's that phrase I keep saying, body is a lever, fulcrum, lean, push, etc. You get the point now. So by keeping our weight forwards as we do the shove it, we stand more of a chance of starting and ending in roughly the same place on that truck. Now, the problem with this is twofold. First of all, as you can see, we want to end here. So if we don't have our weight forward enough, you end up kind of out the back, there's no chance of you actually getting the second part of the trick. But if you keep your weight too far forward, the opposite happens. The board doesn't have a chance to go all the way around, and then you can't keep rolling, and then you can't do the second half of the trick anyway. Finding that sweet spot in terms of weight positioning, that is by far the hardest part of this trick. If you're 99% certain you've got the front to back weight distribution correct, you're landing in the right position, ready to do the trick, but you've come up short, the board's consistently like 145, 150 degrees instead of a perfect rolling 180, there's a good chance the problem is actually in your knees. This is one of the many tricks that requires an element of weightlessness that you generate through a squat. You pump and depump, and as you straighten your legs, you're taking your weight off it without jumping. A good way of learning that is actually a very similar sort of trick, the rail whip back. Now that involves the same thing. You're trying to spin the board without losing contact with it, so you've got to take your weight off it, and you use this pump, depump motion to make it work. Now, if you're struggling with the rolling switchblade, although this seems totally different, try learning this first. I've already done a trick tip for it. There'll be cards, links, whatever. There'll be something around this video pointing you to this trick. So maybe give that one a go first. Once you've gotten over the hurdle of that, shove it, you should be ending up something like this. Board completely straight, perfect 180, front foot ending over what was the front truck, obviously now at the back. And we want to be balanced slightly, so we need to keep our weight over the board, still slightly leaning forwards. Now you don't need to stand like this for ages, because at this point we can do the second half of the trick, which is literally just bringing this back foot across to here and unwinding. Now, hopefully, I shouldn't need how to explain that. It's pretty self-explanatory. You should know how to walk the dog and monster walk. I went through this. All we're doing is unwinding. Now, this is also where that front foot position really comes in. If you started this trick totally perpendicular, you have this crazy long stretch to unwind. Fair play to you if you can do the trick like that. I definitely can't, but it looks crazy. But if you had that front foot pointing straight forward, at this point, all you're doing is the world's most boring walk the dog. There's nothing really to it. So that's why I said you want to aim for this 45 degree. It still looks dynamic and weird enough that it gives it some flow and something interesting, but it makes it a lot easier than the totally perpendicular, completely cross-legged awkwardness of that. But it's not only that ending where the monster walk really comes into its own. See, when I first started doing this, I was thinking of it as a standalone entity. There you go, it's just Switchblade. Do exactly what you do with the regular Switchblade, but rolling. And to be honest, it looked like ass, it felt like ass, just generally was ass. Not particularly nice. Now, very quickly, I realized that by doing 2 monster walks, just 2 alternating pivots, all of a sudden, it was like magic. It put my chest in the right orientation, it gave it all a little bit of a flow, a little bit more motion. So, I highly recommend that you look at doing that. Just 2 little monster walks before you do the Switchblade makes such a big improvement to the whole thing. Something else to consider with this is rolling speed. Now, most of the time when I demonstrate stuff, I do it relatively slowly, because I want to try and keep it in frame. But due to the nature of this trick, you can, in theory, do it at a whole range of speeds. You need a little bit of forward motion to make it flow. But if you've got the cojones, let's say, you can do these quite quickly. Just gets very scary. Okay, here goes nothing. Reckless abandon. Hey. If you've watched this whole video and you've gone, I really like this rolling Switchblade, it looks nice, but isn't that a walk the cow? Then no, actually, no, it isn't. If you are a bit more, say, a footwork connoisseur, you might have watched this and gone, I like that, but isn't that a Mitzi? No, it isn't that either. See, one of the things that's most interesting about footwork is how small variations in approach and technique can completely change the flow and the mechanics of a move. The only real difference between this and a Mitzi is the fact that a Mitzi starts with 2 kind of blindside endovers rather than a monster walk, and the Mitzi has your body completely side on rather than facing forwards. Now that might sound like a small difference, but believe me, having done both, it completely changes the whole trick. Similarly, a walk the cow has a lot in common with this, but it involves a bit more complication, a little bit more kind of getting tied up in yourself, so it tends not to flow quite as well. But they're all effectively the same family of moves. Now, if you do like this, if you have enjoyed it, look at some of the great footwork masters out there. Guys who often get looked over because they don't do the big flashy truck transfers or like massive shove-its. Guys like Hans Smit, Erwin Shove-it, Stefan Johansson. These are guys who can take small movements like this and add little tweaks, little adjustments to do truly amazing things. Footwork is an art unto itself, and I highly recommend that anyone watching this gives it a go. It'll make you a better skater, and it'll give you far more to play with in the long run. But for now, go away and go skate.